Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, I thought we were starting with a video. Very warm afternoon on this miserable day. And so a very warm welcome to the webinar. As you know, this webinar is hosted by Research and Innovation at UWC to honor National Women's Day and Women's Month and our ongoing, still critical struggles for gender justice in higher education and in society more broadly. As you can see from the program, my name is Tamara Scheffer, and I'm a member of the Women's and Gender Studies Department in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. And it's really a privilege and a pleasure, as we like to say, to be moderating this event. I would like to begin by thanking our DVC Research and Innovation, Prof. Jose France, for hosting and initiating this event, and for her long and dedicated commitment to gender and all forms of justice through supporting these kind of events and scholarship in general that is directed at gender and other social justice issues. It's also really encouraging to have an event like this because it's an indication that we take in Women's Month seriously at UWC. This is just one of such events, of many this month. Far too often, and I think we all are familiar with the kind of comments, happy Women's Day, ladies. I hope you spoil yourself. Of course, we know that Women's Day and Women's Month is not about that. It's not about an individual honoring or spoiling of women just because we're women. Rather, it's an honoring of women's struggles and gender struggles and continued struggles for gender and intersecting justices in South Africa and globally. So we should never forget that National Women's Day commemorates the day in 1956, which I worked out is now 68 years ago, that over 20,000 women across social and apartheid differences marched on Parliament in protest against apartheid and its draconian laws, and also to protect the rights of women and children at the time. We remember the words that the marchers famously chanted, Watinta Bafazi, Watintum Bokodo, you strike the woman, you strike the rock. This was a powerful historical moment in which women's collective strength and solidarity were more than evident, something we continue to be reminded of in more recent years as we witness women and other marginal communities taking to the streets in numbers, so often leading protests against sexual and gender-based violence, against homelessness, against lack of services, and so many other pressing concerns in our society and globally. So our webinar today focuses in on the university, which is appropriate, and its roles and responsibilities with respect to gender and social justice. Entitled, as you can see, Bridging Gaps, Interdisciplinary Approaches to Gender Equality and Social Justice in Higher Education. Our goal today is to explore innovative approaches that foster this in higher education. And we have three great speakers who will be sharing at different levels these kinds of initiatives. We are all deeply aware that our universities continue to both reflect and reproduce and bolster existing inequalities, power, and privilege in our society. Of course, there's been a long project of transformation in South Africa, even before, but certainly after our democracy, to correct the inequalities and injustices of apartheid education. Many students, workers, academics at universities in South Africa have for many years, and more recently through the decolonial movements of the fallist activists, our students and workers and scholars have been trying to rethink and remake the university. We know we've got a long way to go, as gender and other inequalities are more than evident in many aspects of the curriculum and our institutional frameworks of higher education. It's therefore so important that we continue to have these kind of dialogues, to share our efforts in this respect, to bring together the knowledges we've gained through exploring, through initiatives. I also want to remind us that this webinar is located in the context of the SDGs, the global commitments to sustainable development. To remind us all, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted by all United Nations members in 2015, which created a whole bunch of sustainable development goals, of which quite a few relate to gender and intersecting inequalities. And I know some of the speakers today will be picking up on those. The SDGs were created with the aim of peace and prosperity for people and the planet, while tackling climate change and working to preserve oceans and forests. So in the context of our local and global gendered and other challenges, we welcome you all here today and invite everybody who's here to participate actively. Please do share your voices. We hope it will be a rich discussion, not just lectures. Our particular project today is to explore and share diverse strategies, approaches, and collective efforts across the university, as I said, and across disciplines to address complex gender equality issues and to build more inclusive, equal, and just higher education institutions that allow women and all of us to flourish. So we hope our conversation will amplify a range of voices, including student narratives and wide-ranging examples of feminist activism, gender justice, change on campus. So we're fortunate to have 3 expert speakers on our panel today who represent different sectors and are all actively involved in gender justice efforts in the university and in other spaces and places. So I'm going to introduce our speakers briefly. And many thanks at the outset to all 3 of you for making yourself available to be here today and to share your research, your expertise, your practice with us here today. So each speaker will take 15 minutes and we will then have the larger discussion after that. So please do remember to note down any comments or questions that you have for each speaker so that we don't kind of forget the earlier comments and the earlier issues that were raised. Our first speaker will be Ms. Tamsin Moses. Tamsin is a UWC law student. Tamsin, perhaps you can just put on your camera in the meantime so people can look at others besides for me. Tamsin is a UWC law student whose scholarship and practice is clearly driven by her passion for social justice and a strong commitment to Pan-Africanism. Tamsin's dedication to her studies has earned her recognition, and she wrote this amazing final year paper, which I looked up online, Mahlangu and Another versus Minister of Labour, the distinction between social assistance and social insurance in South Africa. This paper reflects her desire to transform the social grant system in South Africa to better support marginalized, subjugated communities. Balancing her academics with community service, Tamsin has made a significant impact as a student assistant in the law faculty. She's also been clearly a political leader on campus, having earned the highest votes as a final year law student council candidate. I'm sure that's quite an achievement. Ran for SRC president with PASMA and founded the Student Solidarity Coalition to unite students in the pursuit of justice and equity. As a committed socio-political activist, an intersectional feminist, and a survivor, Tamsin challenges systematic oppression and inspires others to join her in the fight to empower marginalized communities and ensure a just and equitable future. Tamsin, it's wonderful to have you here, and I'm going to hand over to you for 15 minutes. I'll give you some sort of warning when it's time's coming up. Okay.
Hi. Thank you so much, Ms. Snyder. Hi, everyone. I don't know if you can see me and can hear me. Okay, perfect. I'm going to ask Ms. Snyder to please play that little video. Thank you.
posting that.
Okay. I'll come back to the reason I actually wanted that video to play out for everyone to see in the beginning. But I want to start with who I am and why I am, which is more important, and it is the basis for this entire conversation. My name is Tamzon Moses. I am 22 years old, and I'm also a final year law student. And the reason I emphasize final year law student is just to give you a bit of background. I failed a module last year, and I had to repeat my entire final year doing one module. But luckily for me, I am an associate student, meaning that I received over 70% for my CAM for that module, and I can now just write the exam at the end of the year. But with that challenges, I also don't receive funding from any bursa or any scholarship. But they do, NSFAS does fund my residence for the time being. And there's a specific reason why I'm mentioning all of this, trust me. Even just last week, Saturday, I was robbed of my possessions. I know I smile, it's just in my heart, I believe some people or the person that took it definitely deserved it more than I did, needed the money, etc., etc. But I'm even doing this talk on my cell phone. Yeah, which is really difficult when you have lost your laptop, all your resources that are on your laptop, your chargers, everything. It's insane to navigate that space. But the reason I mention this is because I'm not the first student to, go through financial difficulties and then also have to pick yourself up and remember why you need to finish your degree. And also understanding that coming from a marginalized community, as Ms. Snyder's mentioned, I'm from Ravensmead, which is very close to the university. But as most students will know, when you live in such rural areas, which I only call rural because of the state that it is in, we don't necessarily have that like leg to stand on, but it comes from within. So also the reason I mentioned this is the topic of conversation, or the topic that I have decided to focus on, is social justice within our educational systems. That includes UWC looking into what is the socioeconomic makeup of this institution. And as we know, UWC, it carries the most marginalized students, first generation students. And I do apologize if you hear singing in the background. It is one of my housemates at Res. Those also one of the things to take in consideration when you're living on Res. But I enjoy it. I definitely enjoy it. Mentioning that, going back to the topic of conversation, us as students, especially from marginalized communities, it's very difficult to navigate the space whereby you don't have the necessary resources to continue even going to class, to eat. I've had many students come up to me and ask, can you just send me a little bit of money? I have nothing. I haven't received NSFAS for the past 3 months. And in the state I am, I can't even be like, yes, here it is, because as you know, I've also lost quite a bit and I don't receive any form of money to carry myself through the month. But one thing I love about the motto that UWC currently has and is instilling in students is student entrepreneurship. And that is something that I carry with me as well. And I do own a small business. The reason I also mentioned that is because socioeconomically, as a female navigating this space, we come to the decision to actually have to become something. As a student, you have to, when you've been at the bottom, you have to come to a conclusion that it's only up, as the saying says, it's only up from this point forward. So socioeconomically in our institutions, when we look at what is the little allowance that students also receive and how does that actually help students, we can also come to the agreement that in essence, it is not enough to cover student needs, honestly. And I think that since having conversations with people like Azania, which you see in the video that I played in the beginning, we also realize that the fight for free education has only begun. It's only started, and it's only going to become more, I wouldn't like to say aggressive, but more head on, because we live in a time where students are completely becoming a marginalized, I would say, community, because students form their own communities. Um, and that is also reinforced by things like unemployment. And one thing about unemployment in today's society is for instance, my one of my friends had to apply at a call center. And the first thing they asked him was, "Are you a graduate?" When even call centers are asking for graduates, it is it definitely makes you realize the state at which we are in when it comes to the unemployment sector, especially regarding students. But to cut this short and not to rant, the reason I played that video, as I just mentioned, we are only at the pinnacle of trying to find a solution to how we will get to that golden age of free education. And the only way we will be able to get to that state is if we really take into consideration, as I said, the socioeconomic factors. And that includes being a woman. Doing my research and understanding that it is completely insane that, no offense to anyone that will take offense to this, that male representing persons receive the same amount of allowance as female representing persons, who also, all persons that receive or get their period monthly, because we all know that sanitary towels is expensive. We live in an age where you can't even get it at clinics. There are certain clinics that has pads, and there are certain clinics that you can't even get it because it's so scarce at this point. But we also have to take into consideration climate change and how those things, pads specifically, and how it is made, and how it also affects climate change. I always say that there is no future without an earth. So it's important for me to also touch on the fact that climate change is very important. But coming back to that video, Azania, to me, although she's not presenting today, she is a massive mentor. She has taught me so much, from Fees Must Fall to the women's movement that happened last year in November, which was led by the UWC Women's Bloc, which the SSC also forwarded. I certainly think that when we have women that can generally stand up with other women, we create a system and a web of sisterhood, which to me is very important, which people like Azania preaches about, the sisterhood, the female system that keeps us together and doesn't necessarily reinforce this breakage of you a white female and you a black female, and we shouldn't be mixed in that way. Intersectionally, we need to also understand what it is that affects a student, an African student, female student, first of all, because that is what it means when we speak about intersectional feminism. So back to that video, Azania has taught me that when we speak about social justice within an education spectrum, we need to understand the socioeconomic makeup of an institution. And the one thing that affects us as UWC students, which I'm using this platform to speak on, is that the necessary, I would say, help that we need and assistance we need can be very scarce. And that, to me, I understand that it is because we are a vast majority of, economically disadvantaged students. And it's very difficult to then help everyone. My mother always says you can't help everyone. But I would like to place importance on the fact that the socioeconomic makeup of UWC is very much an imitation of what it is to live in a South African society. And that is the entire purpose of my conversation. When we look at what is UWC standing for today, we also understand that the entrepreneur aspect also speaks on having to further the economic standing of a South African society. But the only way we will further that socioeconomic aspect and helping students, and also understanding that students are the future of this entire country, we need to then be able to give those students the necessary assistance, the necessary guidance, and the necessary help in all ways, shapes, and forms to tell them and guide them into how it is to feel protected within an institution. When I say protected, I also mean in a social justice aspect, that being economically as well. And to close this, the reason I point on social protection is also that we have had a law. I can't get to a good word now, but we've had the sexual violence policy for, I don't know, since 2018, and it hasn't been updated since then. That is one of the social aspects that will continue to break down the structures of safety and security, whether that includes economically, whether that includes socially. As I've been reiterating, socioeconomic, it's very important that those two are looked together and not in isolation. And that is also what forms our opinion on intersectional feminism. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. Thanks for it being perfectly on time as well. And thank you for that very powerful but also disturbing, very material input on the context of students at UWC and, of course, at other universities in South Africa as well. We are reminded that we're going to go with all the speakers first. So please do take down any notes of comments, questions that you would like to ask Tamsin at the end in our discussion session. I'm going to now introduce you to Ms. Maria van Staden, who's our second speaker. Maria, maybe you can put on your speaker. Welcome. Maria is a researcher and a former program coordinator in the Gender Equity Unit at UWC. She's still at Gender Equity. She's also, we have to boast, an alumni of the Women's and Gender Studies Department that I'm also from. Undoubtedly, most of you here are very familiar with the wonderful work of the GEU, but for those perhaps less familiar, it's worth flagging that the GEU is the unit at UWC, which makes sure that no one is discriminated against, harassed, or hurt because of their gender, race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation, and promotes women's and gender equality and social justice through feminist research, education and advocacy on campus and beyond. And these are the words on the website, but this is something we all know about the GEU. Maria has been working long and hard at gender justice in the university for many years through wide-ranging research, practice-based and policy innovations at the university and in communities around UWC. She holds a diploma in social work and an M4 in women's and gender studies, as I mentioned, and has extensive experience in psychiatry, disability sectors, and a special interest in rural development. Maria has developed gender programs in organizations like the Scouts and brings her knowledge and experience to the Gender Equity Unit and to UWC. Maria, over to you, and we'll give you 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be part of this webinar. I hope I'm audible.
Oh, good, Maria.
Okay, no, thank you so much. Okay, my name is Maria, as introduced this afternoon from the Gender Equity Unit. And this afternoon, I will be presenting on the non-formal education program for girls living in rural areas and farms. That was part of a rural female youth mentorship project. So there is a global recognition of the need to address systemic inequalities that hinder, sorry, let me just get this right here. Okay, there is a global recognition of the need to address systemic inequalities that hinder progress towards sustainable development. So the Sustainable Development Goal number 10 aims to reduce the inequalities within and among countries. So I was part of a project which is called Inequalities Within and Among Countries. That was a project that was funded by DART and actually brought us together as researchers from Germany, South Africa, and Malaysia and India to achieve this goal. Okay, the project aims to develop a research-based curriculum on social inequalities and to facilitate exchanges between partner universities and establish a transnational research network. So what was my contribution to this project? My contribution to this project focused primarily on the girl-child issues and the provision of non-formal education opportunities, which are closely aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, number 10, 10.3, which actually is about ensuring equal opportunities and ending discrimination. So through this study, non-formal education was explored as an extension of the formal education system that can equip girls with necessary skills to overcome contextual marginalization. So the study, as I said, the aim of the study was to explore the perceived influence of non-formal education intervention on the lived experiences, behaviors, and relationship of the girls participants through the perspectives of and narratives of their parents, guardians, and the mentors. It was a group of 25 girls, 70% Afrikaans speaking and 30% isiXhosa speaking, and mostly of them were living on farms and from rural areas within the Western Cape. All these girls were attending secondary schools, and the mentors that I'm referring to were youth over 30 years from the various municipality districts. So if you look at the that illustration, the girl child, it actually said that the girl child face multi-layers of vulnerabilities. They face marginalization, no involvement in extramural activities, access to schools, traveling, walking to school, stigmatization, harsh living conditions, substance abuse. And I think these girls, child face multi-layered barriers due to their intersecting marginalized identities, being rural, being female, from a historically oppressed racial group, and low socioeconomic backgrounds. And their intersectional disadvantages limit their access to education, healthcare, economic opportunities, and protection from harm. So in the study, the methodology that was employed was an action research study, and the central goal was to enact positive transformation. The research was guided by the principles of action research, employing a cyclic process of planning, implementing the non-formal education program, evaluating its impact, and using those insights to guide further cycles of change. Okay, the data collection. The girls were attended 2 weekend residential educational workshops. And the topics that were covered were self-esteem, gender-based violence, awareness, conflict resolution, substance abuse, and financial literacy, sexual health, and career guidance. Then after and before we engage with them on the formal education workshop, we had contact engagement with the parents on the farms, but also post the non-formal education workshops, we had interviews with the parents, the guardians, and the mentors at their homes on the farms, which actually was very comfortable for them. We creating that safe space for them to be give their views in a more comfortable and a familiar environment. I think here are some of the pictures just illustrating the activities during these workshops that focus on leadership, it focus on gender-based violence, etc. And you can see they're working in groups. They leading all the discussions, their involvement, etc. And just learning from each other. I think what made the study very interesting was employing a feminist pedagogical approach, and which presented the key opportunities for analyzing the societal power structures and amplifying the marginalized voices, offer that leadership development training, resilience building, and collective organizing capacity, promoting agency and self-efficacy, and building solidarity. So I think that was a very important part of the learning during our workshops. And I think powerful girls actually came out very powerful, where their voices were produced and heard, and actually contribute to that community building and empowerment of these girls. So what were some of the findings? I think some of the findings were the improved relationship between parents and guardians and daughters. The girls found their voices and they felt more comfortable asserting themselves. There was increased confidence and personal development. It promoted the social inclusion of these marginalized girls within their family units, but also challenging the norms that previously constrained their inclusion. Part of the program was the mentoring support, which actually was extension of the family support, which actually addresses unequal opportunities by supplementing familial constraints with additional enrichment opportunities through mentors, but also providing equal and comprehensive access for master girls to support systems. I think post workshops, participants were very proactive in their communities. They engage with communities on the farms with girls and at schools, where they served as they act as channels through which knowledge were transferred, but also challenged the intersecting power imbalances which marginalize and silence their voices and talents. So what were some of the benefits? I think the benefits of this non-formal education program, it presented an intersectional approach aligned with and promoting gender equality inclusion as outlined in the Sustainable Development Goal number 10.2 and 10.3. And it provided them with a platform to express themselves, fostering their own social inclusion. It was about building their local leadership through the mentors that were involved and the girl participants, capacities were increased, and they were able to empower communities to advocate against discriminatory practices, as stated in SDG 10.3. And it actually positioned the girl child as owners of information, addressed power imbalances and systemic inequalities by centering the perspectives and experience and the solution envisioned by the marginalized themselves. So I think that is in essence my presentation. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria, for sharing this really rich intervention, this program that also shows UWC working in collaboration with communities, particularly in really disadvantaged areas. And would have been lovely to have heard more of the young women's voices as well, but perhaps bigger presentation when we have more time. Thank you so much. Please do remember to take down notes of any comments or questions you had to ask or to share, because we will come back in the discussion at the end. So finally, but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome and introduce Prof. Melanie Lake. Melanie, perhaps you can put your camera on. Melanie is a professor in the Faculty of Education at UWC, and she is also currently HOD of the Educational Studies Department in that faculty. As a STEM educator, Prof. Lake conducts research on technological literacy and classroom practice, with particular emphasis on promoting voice, agency, and intersubjectivity. We can see voice being a very strong theme throughout this webinar. In her scholarship and as previous teaching practice coordinator, Melanie also collaborates with regional education stakeholders and high-profile scholarly liaisons. She's currently working on a range of local and transnational research projects, including a recent community engagement project, an NRF-funded partnership between South Africa and Sweden, an initiative of SASUF with partners of UWC, UCT, the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, Uppsala University in Sweden, which focuses on developing an integrated approach to classroom practice towards growing partnerships between educational and OT, occupational therapy practitioners. And I think it's to this project that indeed Prof. Lake will be speaking now. It's wonderful to have you with us. Prof. Melanie Lake, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll share the presentation in a minute. I think we need to stop sharing, and then I will share my presentation.
Maria, and has Maria stopped sharing? Yeah, she has.
Thank you. I'll put it on slideshow. Thanks. I think everybody can see my presentation. Thank you. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And thank you for this opportunity to allow me to share my insights into my research, and particularly with a focus on interdisciplinary research. The title of my presentation is An Interdisciplinary Case Study of Teacher Education and Occupational Therapy Students, a Social Justice in Context. So I will be going through this presentation by just giving you a brief outline, because in terms of time, I will only be focusing on how my research is related to the SDG, and particularly with a focus on SDG 10. I also want to outline some of the interdisciplinary strategies that we used as we developed and conceptualized the project, some of the outcomes and impacts of the project, and also then just the way forward. Just before we start, I'd like to locate why I situate myself within the interdisciplinary definition of collaboration. So there are many collaborations, and you might have heard there's multidisciplinary, there's transdisciplinary. But our project was conceptualized from a team of researchers, and each of them had different competencies with different experiences in the field. Our goal was to formulate a team where we could exchange knowledge and generate new ideas around concepts that were important within both our areas. And within this space, we looked at two disciplines, and the first discipline is from education. The other one was from health sciences. And here we wanted to integrate our knowledge in order to bring about changes within the spaces in which we work. While this project does cover a number of SDGs, most of ours are focused on children, on participation of children, and particularly around how this participation impacts the reduction of inequality. So to focus specifically on the project, it was a project between a collaborative project amongst colleagues from occupational therapy and myself in teacher education. So the way the project came about was that it was rooted within the South African-Sweden University Forum. And here we had Lizette Farias, which was a colleague from Karolinska Institute. She came to one of our presentations hosted at UWC. What UWC did was they hosted South Africa-Sweden University Forum, in which some of our colleagues from Sweden were able to attend. We did not know each other. Not any of us knew each other. The only commonality between us that we were all in schooling and that we all worked in partnerships. And Lizette Farias, Rashan Galfan, Helen Lidstrom, and myself came together not knowing each other at all. Rashan did send me an invitation, knowing that I have a teacher education background, but also knowing that I worked in schooling. So the impetus of our project was around a common area, and the common area was really around schooling and partnership. We then embarked on this project, and the title of the project you can see is Partnering to Address the Challenges Affecting Children and their Participation in Primary School located within low socioeconomic schools between South Africa and Sweden. So I think what was really also, and what brought us together in this umbrella, the focus that brought us together was really around the SDG, and the SDG deals with focusing on the broad umbrella inequality within different spaces. And in our space is we're working with schools, and we're looking at inequality in schools. So the SDG did play a very important role anchoring us within our spaces, and it was in South Africa and within Sweden. What was very important in the development of this partnership was to develop networks. Now, our networks were with our student teachers and our occupational therapist students. And what we wanted to do as the teacher educators, as the educators within our faculties, that is OT and education, was to develop these networks between the OTs and the teacher educations, so that from the level of them studying, they would be able to be exposed to these kinds of partnerships and take it into the spaces when they do occupy the professional world. We also wanted to develop, beside the networks, was these strategies to support the children within schools and to allow them to participate more broadly in the activities in schools. And what we found was that socioeconomically, we found that children within lower socioeconomic contexts weren't able to optimally occupy the spaces within their classrooms and within the schools. We tried to develop evidence-based interventions, tools for mainstream schools. So we wanted to base the tools that we're going to develop off evidence. And when we looked at the literature, because we had to have our initial conversations first, we found that there was a big gap in the literature, and particularly within the South African space, where the working of social work, of OTs, and any other kind of health people who work in the health industry, there was very limited interaction between them. So we want to start developing this model with teacher education and OTs, and we wanted to develop new knowledge. And this new knowledge was important for us because it would allow within our spaces these learners to benefit from working with within amongst the OTs and the teacher educations. So the targets that we wanted to work with were these children at schools, particularly at primary schools. We wanted to look at partnerships differently. We wanted to disrupt that way of looking at partnerships. So in teacher education, how we particularly looked at partnerships was we would go visit a school and we would get to know the school and do some projects at the school, and then we'd leave. What we wanted to do was we wanted to take a more systemic look at this child, look at the child from the perspective from the teacher, from the perspective of the actual motor skills, the skills that they have in working with within the spaces within the school. But we also wanted to look at it from a more contextual reality of that child. And our focus was the low socioeconomic contextual reality. We also wanted to create some kind of change that would take place amongst the working of people within the school context. So what we found was that most times when an OT goes into a school or any space, what would happen is they would just work with that child on an individual basis, get a bit of input from the teacher, and then further on, nothing would be, we wouldn't investigate the context, we wouldn't investigate where they came from. There was no real systemic and real integration of knowledge from all spheres within the school. And we wanted to support the child more holistically at the school. And at the point that we are now with the development of our project is we started the conversations, we looked at the literature. It was, we did a rapid appraisal of the literature, looking at where the gaps were. We then developed a proposal, and the proposal played an important role in guiding us into how we're going to navigate this generation of new knowledge. We did a lot of workshops and activities with students. So as part of the project, with the funding from SASUF, we were able to apply for NRA funding. And through the NRA funding, we were able to do a staff mobility exchange where we spent about 2 weeks. They spent 2 weeks in South Africa and we spent 2 weeks with them. And here we were able to develop ideas around what schooling looks like in South Africa and what schooling looks like in Sweden. Interestingly, what we picked up and from our visit to Sweden was that there are currently some models of teacher-OT collaborations. And once we spoke through those models, So there's a teacher located at a school, and there's also an OT associated with the teacher, and they work quite closely together. We found that it was very, very useful. The teachers were actually very complimentary of the support that they get from the OTs. And when we looked at how we can break down we can disrupt these ways of thinking about partnership. Partnership is also about, not only about visiting schools, it's about taking the child, having an holistic look at the child. So if you take a practical example, for instance, sometimes when a child transitions from one classroom to the next, some children have problems with the transitioning. Some of them would rather prefer sitting in the classroom throughout the day and not having to deal with going to another class, changing, for instance, if they go to PE, changing the uniform, etc. It would be very difficult for them. So the teacher would diagnose this as an issue, but they wouldn't know they would know the pedagogical reasons behind it, but they wouldn't know the actual processes of why this child is struggling. And that's where the OT came in. And they were able to develop a system for the child of key steps in trying to transition from one class to the other. And that's just one example of how the OT and the teacher could work together. And we actually saw it happen in context in a school in Sweden and a low socioeconomic school. What we also found was that when we went to Sweden, most of the low socioeconomic schools were housed with learners who came from a refugee background. So there was a lot of more complex diagnosis within that student's functioning. And that was important to acknowledge. That was something that a teacher couldn't actually diagnose because we don't have a medical background. And that's where the OT played a very important role in guiding and supporting the teacher. We also had some pilot activities amongst OTs and teacher students. And here we were able to ensure that they connect and they discuss and they talk about their experiences at the school. And it was very heartening to see how they were able to engage with one another in a way that, because of the commonality of the school, they were able to talk to each other and be able to guide each other through some of the ideas and innovations and functionings at schools. But they were also able to highlight the strengths and weaknesses of working at schools. So we also learned a lot from our colleagues in Sweden, and they learned a lot from us. So as I end the conversation around my work, I just want to move forward with some take-home messages about how we deal with interdisciplinary research. So while I make it look very linear and that it's easy that we got together and we worked together, it wasn't always that easy. It's quite complex because sometimes it can become a bit messy. There were some conversations that were quite difficult. Sometimes we have our knowledge, we experts in certain fields, and we tend to want to not be very open into accepting other people's ways of thinking. And this happened where there were some messy conversations, there were some issues around, there were many disagreements, but we had to work through it and talk through it in order to have a common understanding, at least try to get to a common understanding in trying to guide us in our way forward. Some interdisciplinary strategies that we learned along the way, and we really had to learn to work together because it wasn't always easy. Like I say, whether it was conceptually, but also practically, because we had preconceived ideas around, for instance, they would think that teachers would work in a certain way. only because, you know, there's that concept that we draw on in education, the apprenticeship of observation, where we all think we know how to teach because we were exposed to school for 12 years. So we come into a space, we think teaching is easy, and we think we know how to teach. So similarly with the OTs, it was, there were some judgments around what teachers do. And with me and the other teachers as well, there were some judgments around what OTs do. You know, do you simply just help people learn to walk and to talk and etc.? And it was more around our prejudices that we had to work through and discuss. Our students also had to do that, and those were difficult conversations, but those were strategies that we had to work through in order to guide us to move forward. The outcomes and the impact. So we did accomplish the outcomes that we planned for the project at this point. What we'd like to do going forward is to develop a bigger proposal and apply for more funding, and also maybe expand our team. And it definitely is important with interdisciplinary research that we ensure that it fits into our niche area. I think one thing that, and one form of advice that I can give researchers is that it's not always easy broadening your research. We need to ensure that we keep our focus in our research. So my focus was schooling. Similarly with the other OTs, their focus was also schooling, and they had other foci which they focused on. And what we needed to do, and when I took on this project, I needed to ensure that it fit into my niche area. So you need to ensure that you continue with your niche and that you make sure that you don't move out of your niche area, so that you become more of a generalist in your research. Keep your focus. And working from the perspective of the SDGs was very, very important for this project, because as I said earlier, it was the commonality between our two spaces. It was an umbrella that put us together in order to seek a common goal, which was the participation of learners, and in this case, it happened to be schooling, and to ensure that there was a reduction in inequality. So this is the space that we're going into now, and I think that from our initial discussions, it really is a worthwhile project moving forward. It's a model that we want to develop that other health professionals can use as well. So thank you. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Prof. Lake. That was really insightful, and I think both interdisciplinary and transnational are very challenging spaces to move across. And I think that many of us have had challenging experiences with that. And I think you've highlighted how we can learn a lot through that process. And I think that's really helpful. So thank you for those constructive comments about what you gained and what you learned. So we can now open up our webinar to discussion, to dialogue, to comments, to questions from participants. It's great to see that we have quite a few participants in the room. I'm not quite sure on the process. Perhaps Melanie Snyders, who's done a wonderful job, thanks to Melanie, while I have the moment to say it, for organizing the webinar on behalf of the DVC Research and Initiative. I'm wondering if people can speak, or whether we have to use questions and answers in the box. Can we answer live? I think you can answer, yeah. I see Karen Colette is wanting to ask a question to Prof. Lake. Do you want to go ahead? Melanie, is it possible for people from the floor to ask their questions?
Yes, it is. They can just indicate if they want to ask, and I'll allow them to speak.
So Karen Colette is wanting to speak from what I can see. And please do raise your hands, colleagues, and we can take a number of questions, but please do go ahead for the first one. Oh, Karen has said, thank you for the presentation. What is the gender makeup of your partnership, and did this influence the partnership in any way? Karen, do you want to add to anything? You can also add your voice to this. Otherwise, we'll hand over then. Oh, we've lost our speaker. We seem to have lost Prof. Lake at that. Are there
No,
other...
I'm still here.
Are you there? Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. I'm just, so is she referring to the project and the makeup? Yeah, okay. So currently we obviously in the beginning stages, and what we found was that in most OT fields, there's mainly females working in the OT field, and also it just happened to be that we were 4 females within this part of the project. But what we are doing is we are going to expand, and we're hoping to just expand the project so that we can bring in more members and hopefully more diversification in terms of gender. I hope that helps, Karen.
Thank you, Professor. Sorry, I couldn't unmute my mic, but I hope you can hear me now. Thank you. And thank you to all the presenters. It was really interesting. Thank you. Melanie, and when you say they were all females in the partnership at the moment, do you or people who identify as female, would that, do you think that has influenced the dynamics and cohesion in the partnership in any way, or not specifically?
So part of the reason why we got together as a team was because our areas of interest was schooling, and we looked at schooling from different perspectives. So it just happened to be that we were the experts in those fields. And the dynamics of us working together, it was actually, it was fascinating because we didn't know each other. We basically, what they call, we met on a blind date. Like you just send out a Zoom link and we meet each other. And the dynamics of us working together was so, it was driven by our passion and us wanting to develop these children's participation in schooling. So we worked very well together because of that passion, I think. It was a very good combination of people working together. We also were able to stay with each other when we went to Sweden and they came to us. We also got to know each other in those spaces because we got on so well. So thanks.
Thanks, Prof. Lake. I think I've often seen people I collaborate with. I think what happens is you having a long-term friendship, not only a research collaboration. And in fact, friendship is so important because there are challenges that emerge. And I have a question as well too, which I'll ask at a later stage. But can I please ask Bali Maneche, who is online and can unmute and ask a question? Please do go ahead, Bali, and you may introduce yourself as well. I should have said, Karen, when people ask a question, please do introduce yourself to other participants as well. Over to you, Bali.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for a lovely webinar. I was so fascinated and quite honestly immediately drawn in by the first speaker. And I think what the questions that were brought up to my mind when she started speaking and shared her journey in navigating school and the problems that gender then plays within this within navigating this, and it brings up a conversation, and also what Maria then spoke about. It brings up a conversation or a question to my mind that these are clearly is like systemic problems, you know, at a greater level. These are systemic problems where women navigating the system. And we're navigating a system that was really never designed for us. I mean, academia, education was really not designed for us. And we have to navigate this space. But I feel like we're constantly going back and forth and losing students like Tamsin, who, what if, and like me, you know, Tamsin, I was so drawn to your story because I could relate so much to it. And I, like you, was very lucky to find a great mentor. And Tammy, thank you very much, you know, to find an amazing mentor in Tammy. But what happens to those who are not us, who are not you and me, Tamsin, who don't get the lucky break and find that one person who you can hold on to and look up to and look next to you? More importantly, you know, that when you look beside you, they're there. Yeah, and what then is the future of how long can we navigate this? You know, what is the realistic navigating the system that was really never designed for us, who are women, who are Black, who are living in poverty, who are not living with whatever the world sees as an ability. And this is mostly to Maria and Tamsin. And Melanie, how does this then, this specific context in which South Africa then comes from, plays a huge role in your research that is transnational, but also very different context in terms of socioeconomic, you know, as Tamsin kept on repeating, which is such an important thing to note. How does it bridge a gap or create a space of thinking of, Melanie, that difference?
Thanks so much, Barney, for that very stretching question. And I think that all speakers have an opportunity to respond. Perhaps, Tamsin, you'd like to go first?
Okay, no problem. I think that is a very, very good question, because when I was thinking about this presentation, initially I had a completely different presentation, to be honest with you. It was based off of the article that I wrote in the e-magazine, and it was just kind of a continuation of that. But as I wrote this morning, I realized that people need to hear student stories, especially when we come into a space full of academics. Sometimes the student needs to show, okay, this is what we are also facing. And as much as we can't necessarily say it's backed by research, we live those experiences. And the research that we do get off of our experiences are always backdated, especially when it comes to women in these spaces. It's always backdated. Like I said, the sexual violence policy has only been updated in like 2018. You know, it's very concerning. But definitely looking into the longevity of navigating the educational spaces or institutional spaces as a student, as a female student, can be difficult. I, for one, I didn't have a mentor from first year to third year. We were experiencing COVID. It was difficult. But I also think that coming to UWC and realizing, okay, there are things like your first year experience. I know SASCO has like first friend on campus. There's just different things that we as students have now come to say, okay, or not even just now, we've realized that we need to help one another regardless, and we need to open these spaces for one another regardless, because we all experiencing the same issues. If we take away, you know, gender, although it does play a very big role, and we look at the fact that we are all students, we need to realize that navigating the space is not going to be successful if we don't take into consideration the socioeconomic aspects that also lead to our demise sometimes. So I definitely think we live in a space or a current era where it is important to realize that this has never happened before. You know, institutional spaces, including women, including queer people, it's for us to navigate. So this is our time to take up space in these places. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Tamsin. I'm going to hand over to Maria and then we'll go to Melanie to respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. Just to state that the project that I'm referring to is a response to the provincial-wide agri-work household census that was conducted through Department of Agriculture. And I think the fact that the projects that the project, we would like to expand this kind of work to other districts, because the focus was on the Western Cape and specific districts within the Western Cape. So the whole idea is to expand to expand the program's reach to other districts, but also to collaborate. Within the process, we collaborated with other stakeholders like your NGOs, your community organizations, your government departments. So I think that is how we would like to expand the reach of the work. And the fact that the work will be published, that will also extend to other readers, in order to see what has been done with girls living on farm. I think it's a really understudied population, and I think that's why it's very important to get their voice out there as girls living on farms. I think my own interest was being a person that was living in a community that is surrounded by farms, and my personal involvement with girls and women working on farms. I think that was my passion about that actually brought my passion, working with people on farms. Yeah. I hope I was clear. Yeah.
Thanks. Well, Melanie, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, very interestingly, the bridging the gap, and I mean that's something that I've also been thinking about. When I initially started in the project, I thought another international project with people from, well-off, developed backgrounds, etc. What are we actually going to learn from them? When I started working in teaching practice, we had a lot of collaborations with where people would bring outside institutions would bring students to our schools. And most times with these collaborations, it was very one-sided, and they would come to us, but we would never be able to afford to take our students to go over. And as a result, most times I wouldn't agree on these collaborations because it really wasn't fair. We wanted something that could move our students and where our students could also benefit and learn. What I found interesting about this project was that it was we all genuinely had the passion to work with learners in spaces that we called low socioeconomic schools. When I went, and I felt that it taught me a lot about being open to the idea that in other spaces there are also low socioeconomic contexts, but it might look a little bit different to ours. But at the end of the day, the children still experience the same marginalization, prejudice, And it kind of brings me to kind of what Tamsin was maybe saying, that, you know, her experience at university is, it could be that we've got a little child with no voice sitting in that space that that nobody really is paying attention to, because they're not paying attention to the context in which they're living in, and they're not willing to understand the context. So I think from our approach, what we wanted to do is we wanted to take it from first understanding the spaces that we're in, and then jointly working out through our expertise processes where we could exchange and build each other. And it gave me hope that this was a way of bridging a gap between our two contexts. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mindy. I mean, I was actually going to ask about that, because so many of the collaborations I've had, in a way, those global north, global southern inequalities actually get sort of exposed and sometimes even exacerbated. And, you know, just the differences in our contexts are so powerful. And quite often, you know, they assume a whole set of things are in place for just at the process level. Even currently collaborating on an EU Horizon project, which I should give a call out. Look out for Rewiring. We will share this project soon. It's about girls and women's inclusion. And in our UWC group, we're focusing on representation in the media and in symbolic terms. And in fact, Balisem, who's here in the asked the question, is one of the researchers on that project and is doing her PhD in the area. So it is, I mean, you know, but we found in that project that there was such an assumption of a whole set of resources that we had in our context that we don't have. So in a way, we ended up working so much harder, you know, and yet often our knowledge is seen as, you know, we gain in the knowledge, that kind of unequal notion, which, you know, hopefully consciously we have challenged, but unconsciously that often does get perpetuated. So it's encouraging to hear that your team, you know, worked with and against. And yeah, but I wanted to ask a quick question, because I don't see there any more. Are there any hands up? No. So then maybe I can abuse the position of chair and ask a question sort of to all of the presenters, but around bridging gaps of participation, not in terms of the researchers on the team, but also about the participants in the research project. You've all spoken about participation as being a key thing, and perhaps, Tamsin, in your context, it's about student leadership and participation of other students. How does one work in these projects in ways that doesn't reproduce this kind of representation of others' stories, of others' narratives, that really brings the community we're working with into having a voice that's an equal voice, that isn't down below, as you put it, Tamsin. And I mean, I think that's something that so much of our research is trying to challenge, is this, and disrupt in the university, this idea that scholars who are lecturing have all the knowledge, and that students are coming with this, you know, empty vessel, which is so you know, counterproductive to learning, when we are all learning with each other for better ways of being and living. So yeah, I wondered if maybe all three of you could say something about that. And then we can also just have a short last comments from anybody before we end off, because I do see we're heading towards the end, and add anything else you would like to share when you respond. So I'm going to start with whoever would like to go first. Tamsin, you look like you're all ready, so over to you.
Okay, that's a very nice question, because I think that student activism is always looked through like a dark lens, blinders on, and we don't necessarily understand, like, just on the surface of it, what student activism actually is. And when actually looking in the beginning of each year, you have a lot of student political organizations, EFF, SC, PASMA, SASCO, all of them, their first goal in the beginning of the year is to help students that are struggling with any form of, registrations, academic issues. It's just to alleviate that panic, that stress, and we don't take that into consideration sometimes in the space that kind of separates academics and lecturers from the students, when in essence we need to understand without students there is no institution, there is no university. A university is erected for students. It will just be an empty building if you think about it strategically. So when I focus on how does student activism then also kind of bridge this gap, we also need to understand that when we have people like the LSC, like the SRC, all your leaders in these spaces, it becomes kind of a gray area, because as lecturers, I've understood that they also feel threatened by certain students. Not to go off topic, but I think it's also important to notice that as a student myself, having to navigate this space, and also as a student leader, having to be like, I need to be loud, but I also need to take into consideration that this is a lecturer, this is someone that has a PhD, this is someone that they were born 50 years before me, not to be, but to me, it's also important to bridge that gap by having respect. That is what's important to me. And just to make mention of other student leaders and females that are also navigating this space, it's very important to me to give them their flowers. You have people like Haja, she's part of PAC, not PAC, sorry, PSA, the Palestine Solidarity Alliance or Association. And to me, it's important that we mention these student leaders, people like Shireen, people like Neve, people like Azania and Dimpo, and we need to give them the space to speak. And like I'm given this platform to speak, I wish that these spaces would open up more platforms for student activists and student leaders, not in an aggressive way, but in a way that we are talking right now. And to understand that the only way we bridge the gap between lecturers and students is if the student voice is also as loud as the lecturer's voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamzin, for those powerful words. Wonderful. Thank you. Maria, shall we?
Yes, I think from my side, as I've stated earlier, that the project was a response to the survey that the census that was conducted, and which indicated high unemployment levels among rural youth, but also the low levels of matric qualification, even fewer of them reaching tertiary institution. Based on I think I was very much aware of my own positionality within the project, and I think from the findings of that survey of census, it was from the initial phase we engaged with the farm communities. We engaged with the guardians, the mothers. So they've been part of the conceptualization of the project. They've been part of the implementation. The girls been part of the implementation, bringing their voice, bringing their knowledge to the implementation, the conceptualization, but also post the intervention, if I can say, the program, they still had a voice in terms of their evaluation. And the fact that they could use their own the knowledge that were the knowledge that was transferred, they disseminated that information to other structures and to other on the farms, but also within this on their own schools, to the schools. I think if I shared some of the narratives, it would have been, you would have heard the voices of these girls and the mentors and the voices of the parents. So I think that is how I've actually written up my paper in terms the voice of our guardians and parents, the voice of the girls, the voice of the mentors who serve as that supporting system. Beyond this program, the mentors continue with the work on farms, and who guided our young girls that been part of this process. So I think, as I said, all of them were very much involved, and I was very much aware of my own positionality within in this project.
Thanks. So one of the interesting things about this project was we received seed funding, and part of the outputs for the project was not necessarily, it wasn't driven by writing papers and books, etc. It was really driven to get to know each other, because we didn't know anything about each other, but also that's what attracted me to the project as well, to build capacity and networks. And we had a variety of activities because there wasn't that pressure of ensuring that we collect data and get it so that we can write a paper. We were able to host a number of activities. And part of these activities were workshops with students. They were workshops with other researchers. In fact, we had a workshop at SASUF where we were able to invite teacher educators and occupational therapists. But what we found in the workshop was there were many other people who showed interest in the project because of the innovation. And we were able to, there were also other health professionals that came, there were speech therapists, physiotherapists, etc., wanting to know how they could work together so that they could increase the participation of students at the school. The other thing that we also did was we developed capacity. So we drew on an organization called SPOT in it's occupational therapists, but it's a group that allows students to express their voice. So we always highlighted the voice of our research students. So we allowed them to get together. We organized a webinar, and they were able to express their views about the partnership, but also about where they wanted to go. And then another thing we did was we wanted to develop capacity. So we wanted to develop students at UWC and at the other Swedish universities by having masters and PhD students. So I currently have a master's student where we're doing a collaborative research project looking at OT and teacher educators and how they prepare for practice through the use of technology. And so we drew on our interests, and we're trying to really develop voice through building capacity, networks, etc., particularly with students. What we also found was everybody was quite interested, both in South Africa and in Sweden, was we had a look at the curricula of the teacher education curricula and the OT curricula, and they were particularly interested in how we were talking about decolonizing our curricula. So we had all those conversations and activities, but it was only because we didn't have that pressure of collecting data and writing a paper or getting an output, which was a good thing for the with the SASUF NRF funding.
Thank you. I see that Maria has a hand up. And perhaps if anybody has one last comment you'd like to leave us with, Maria, please do go ahead. You need to unmute
Yeah, sorry, I think it was a mistake from my side. That's fine. I'm covered.
Okay, great.
Okay,
well, it's an important comment which I did want to reflect on, but my mic wasn't opening up between transferring speakers, to say that I think everybody's said such important things about voice and participation, but also I think location and situatedness and your own, reflexivity as a researcher also, or as an activist, or as a student, or as a lecturer is so key to this conversation. And I think it came out of everything that everybody said. So unless anybody else has any final questions, I don't see any. Have I missed anything? Melanie? No? Then any final comments from our wonderful panelists? You okay? There's a question by Sibulelo. Can we take that question quickly, colleagues? Because we are at 3:30, but I think we can take another 5 minutes. Everybody happy to wait? Sibulelo? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure. Firstly, apologies. I just joined when the presentation was summing up. But I was really interested when I looked at the webinar and, the topics around that has been designed. I only got to the last part, so I don't know if it will be fair to pose my question, but it's a question that I would want to throw out to our guest today. Around, when we're looking at gender, we say we want to achieve gender equality through research as an institution, especially looking at an institution. It could be through being a student in your projects that you do with your students in collaboration. But as someone who, my name is Fulelo Ganda in the law faculty, I'm an LLD candidate. But as someone in my final year who had chosen an elective in gender law studies, it really opened my mind as a male in South Africa around gender inequalities that are faced by our communities. And I posed a question to a then professor about within the higher institution, what is our role as the UWC through research? Can't we make projects or research in collaboration with the gender equity around, changing or trying to influence the policies around curriculum? Because I'm a strong believer that for us to be able to address gender inequalities and other issues that comes with GBV, etc., is that we need a curriculum where all the 7 faculties, for example, in UWC, it becomes a compulsory for a student, irrespective of your course, where a gender studies looking at gender equity within the institution is that it's a compulsory module. And I would like to hear your views around that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sibulelo. That's a great question to end us off on, and I'm going to let everybody have a chance. I wouldn't mind responding too, since I'm in women's and gender studies, but I'm going to hand it over to Maria, perhaps, to start from Gender Equity Unit.
Thank you so much for the question. I'm laughing because we currently, gender equity is currently part of the community of practice for gender practitioners. And I think and I'm part of the research group on that community of practice. And we're currently looking at whether we need a standalone module on gender sexuality that is mandatory for all faculties, or is it something that need to be integrated into more integrated into other fields? So we now with a standalone, or is it something that need to be, and must it be in mandatory? So I think the UKZN has succeeded to have a model in place, and we're planning a webinar to see all the different kind of models, a more integrated model or a more standalone kind of model of introducing gender and sexuality. So I think that we are there now in terms of in that discussion, and I hope we can bring light after that kind of webinar and exploration.
Thanks, Maria. I think that's very helpful to hear. But just to say, as somebody who's been at UWC a long time, like you too, and others, we've had these debates for 30 years. And, I remember a curriculum project that was about 25 years ago, or 20 odd, when I just came into women's and gender studies, that was in fact working with all the faculties to develop mainstreaming of gender into the curriculum. And, us in women's and gender studies are deeply aware that since we've had a department, a lot of people sort of outsource gender material to and think, okay, well, it happens there, the ghettoization of gender justice issues, which is really problematic because, of course, it needs to be something brought into all the modules, but possibly, in addition, a standalone module that looks at gender also as it intersects with other forms of inequality, because gender never comes on its own. I'd like to ask Prof. Lake or Tamzon, would you like to add anything to this conversation or any final words? Perhaps I'll give both of you a chance and we can then call it to a close. Melanie, would you like to go next?
Definitely those conversations are integrated into all our modules because it's important as a function of what's happening at schools. But what we do need to probably work on is a model where gender equity will be highlighted. We don't have a standalone module, but it's definitely integrated into all the programs. But we also don't want to take it as a standalone module. We might just have to work on it more in sharpening it within each of our modules. And yes, and I would just like to say that on my final point in my presentation, if you want to consider interdisciplinary research, do consider taking it on only if it's within your focus, so that you can develop your niche. So how does it benefit you, and how does it benefit your area of research? So thank you. Thanks.
Thanks for that very helpful parting suggestion. And I'm going to hand over to Tamzon to have the last word.
Thank you. I don't think that question was necessarily posed to me. I'm just a, student, but I will say that coming from the gender equity unit and also having conversations with master students, PhD fellows, it's really difficult for me to come to this conclusion. But I have to say that from experience, a friend of mine was writing his master's paper on a topic which should be within the law field, but because of the difficulty of understanding gender roles and gender equity, it was as if his moderator couldn't understand what he was writing. So to me, it's definitely important that we have a basic understanding even around gender equality and around, gender disparities and all of those things. Me, for instance, I would love to do my master's at the Women and Gender Studies Department, specifically focusing on social grants, specifically focusing on women and them being the ones that are receiving social grants. Because if we look at it statistically, women receive social grants. Mostly women receive social grants compared to how many men receive social grants. And we also need to, I know I've been saying this word a lot, but socioeconomic factors, especially when it comes to women, and why it is that women are the main beneficiaries of social grants. At the previous question that we got specifically asked, why is it that we as women still find it very difficult to navigate these spaces? And we have to then come to the conclusion that it's embedded within our society, unfortunately. It's embedded within the genetic makeup that is South Africa. It comes from colonialism, imperialism, apartheid, and all of that. And we can't necessarily wipe that out by saying, here's an amount of money that is also below, what is required to have a living and make a living. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for that very helpful question, because I think it's a great point to end. Something positive, things that can be done, but also bearing in mind the complexity of that and the nuances. So I'd like to bring us to a close and to thank again Melanie Snyders for all the hard work, our DVC, Prof. Jose France for having initiated and organizing this, and to our wonderful presenters, Prof. Melanie Lacke, Maria van Staden, Tamsin Moses, and all the participants who came today. Thank you for finding the time. We all live such busy lives, and it's always wonderful when people do make it to a seminar to dialogue and to share. So thank you, and wishing everybody a good rest of afternoon, and we'll say farewell. See you next time. A luta continua. Bye.
All right.
Thanks, Melanie.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Frau Schäfer. Thank you, everybody. It was a great success.
I think
Thank
that
you.
was nice.
Enjoy your evening.
Bye.
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 Bye.